Okay, so let's unpack this. Imagine a killer. They're meticulous, they're chillingly calm, and they scrub a crime scene until it absolutely gleams.
Right. They're convinced they thought of everything, every variable, every possible trace. They think they've just committed the perfect crime.
But the sources we have today show why that belief is always, always wrong. Because when you attempt that ultimate cover-up, it's the smallest thing, a tiny stain on a sheet, an impurity in a chemical, a microscopic injury that becomes the silent witness.
And that's what's so fascinating here. It's that intersection. You have this, brilliant calculated effort to hide the truth.
Hmm.
But then you have the unwavering persistence of physical and chemical evidence. We're diving into 3 cases today that really show how forensic techniques had to evolve.
And it's not just one field, right? We're
Yeah.
talking about everything from toxicology and molecular analysis.
Exactly, to, textile forensics that can literally read pressure marks on a pillowcase, and even super specific document analysis, all of it coming together to turn this confusion into absolute clarity.
Absolutely. So our mission here is to walk you through these steps, to show you, bit by bit, how forensic scientists brought these killers to justice. This material really is a testament to the fact that the body and the scene itself, they never truly lie.
Not even when the killer scrubs the walls and flushes the evidence down the toilet. This whole deep dive, it's really about the persistence of that evidence.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to show that no poison is perfect and no cleanup is ever truly complete.
Which leads to a really interesting question. What happens when fear, or maybe greed, drives a killer to destroy all the evidence, only for those very actions to leave behind an even clearer signature of their guilt?
That's the core of it. Let's get into the first case.
Let's start in Detroit, 1994. This case presented some immediate and very confusing paradoxes. On December 10th, police get a call to a hotel suite.
A hotel suite that was, ironically, just a block away from police headquarters.
Right. And the man who called, Lowell Amos, reported that his wife, Roberta Ames, had died of a cocaine overdose.
And the scene was suspicious from the second investigators walked in the door, mostly because of 2 violently conflicting pieces of evidence.
Okay, so what were they?
Well, on one hand, the room itself was immaculate, like blitzsauber, immaculate. Every surface looked like it had been obsessively cleaned, almost scrubbed down. It was just unnaturally neat.
But then you have the centerpiece of the scene.
Exactly. You look at the bed where Roberta was lying, and the sheets were completely soiled and smeared on all sides. That glaring disconnect, it immediately tells you the scene has been manipulated.
And the story Amos gave for that manipulation was, let's just say, flimsy, both scientifically and legally.
Very flimsy. He claimed he found her, he panicked, and he flushed the rest of the cocaine down the toilet.
The classic defense.
Right. And police found a cocaine straw on a playing card, but, no actual drug residue anywhere nearby.
And the timeline was a huge red flag.
The biggest. Roberta had clearly been dead for several hours before Amos ever called the police. The medical examiner, Phyllis Good, was skeptical from the jump.
Not just because of the delay, right? It was the drug itself.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Cocaine is a powerful central nervous system stimulant. It causes agitation, extreme energy, and in the kind of doses we're talking about, often violent convulsions. It keeps a person awake.
So the idea that he was just sleeping soundly next to her while she was taking a dose massive enough to kill her.
It's scientifically implausible.
And then for her to die quietly hours before he wakes up, it just doesn't happen that way. The clinical reality is it's a violent, distressing event.
You couldn't sleep through it. He wasn't asleep. He was likely waiting.
So once they get the body out of there, the focus shifts entirely to the forensics.
Right, the physical evidence,
Yeah.
especially those sheets and the pillowcase. Lowell's story just could not account for the state of that bedding,
Especially since her body, in contrast, was very clean.
which is another huge contradiction.
Yeah.
That led investigators to suspect he'd washed her before he called the police, hoping all that evidence was now, lost forever in the hotel laundry.
And the toxicology reports came back and just blew his story out of the water.
Completely. Roberta had an astronomical amount of cocaine in her system. We're talking 14 times the normal lethal dose.
14 times.
And crucially, she died before even half of that dose could be metabolized. It was a massive, sudden chemical shock to her system.
But here's where the chemical story gets really specific and really damning.
Yes. So despite this huge internal dose, and in fact, there was almost no external residue on her body, the vaginal swabs tested positive for cocaine traces.
Wow. So that's the smoking gun for the delivery method.
It's monumental. because it points definitively to a mode of administration that Amos had completely hidden. This wasn't a drug she inhaled or injected herself. This was a targeted, forced administration of a solution.
And then you have the pillowcase, which starts to tell the story of the physical violence.
Right. The pillowcase was soaked in what looked like cosmetics, maybe lipstick residue.
But when her body was found, she wasn't wearing any makeup.
Exactly. So that gives you a timeline. She was wearing makeup when she went to bed, and someone Amos cleaned her and removed it after she was either dead or incapacitated.
So the forensic team treats the pillowcase with chemicals to see what else is there.
They did. They used chemicals designed to enhance latent marks, and a dark, just horrifying pattern emerged. It was an imprint. It looked like a bite, or at least heavy pressure from teeth, right under a discolored area of the fabric.
And they could corroborate that with the body itself.
Yes. A separate finding showed a bruise on her nose. So you combine the textile evidence from the pillow and the physical injury on her body, and it strongly suggests significant violent force.
The pillow was pressed hard against her face.
So hard that she was likely suffocated while she bit down into the pillow, leaving those distinct marks. The science was now pointing to suffocation after chemical incapacitation.
What about the other stains on the sheets, the brown ones?
That was frustrating initially. The lab report just identified them as vegetative matter. It didn't solve the mystery, but it did deepen the theory of a violent death.
How so?
Because a massive, rapid cocaine overdose often causes violent convulsions. That can mean involuntary expulsion of stomach contents or other bodily waste. Amos tried to clean it all up.
But in his haste, he missed some things.
He missed things. He didn't remove all the traces of what was likely vomit or something similar, and that residual material confirmed the scene was the site of a violent, not a passive, death.
And the cocaine traces were everywhere on the sheets, right? Even tucked under the sides.
Which just further confirmed the manipulation. He didn't just clean the room. He tried to meticulously launder the bedding right there on the bed. But the powder was so pervasive, it was just everywhere.
And this brings us to the missing evidence, because he clearly felt he needed help disposing of the most incriminating items.
Right. We know he called his business partner, a man named Norbert Crabtree, asking for urgent help that morning.
So Crabtree shows up.
He and another partner arrive. Amos hands him a plastic bag and asks him to hold on to it, and the contents were just chilling. A washcloth from the hotel that was, quote, stained and smelled very foul.
Okay.
A sports coat, and most damning of all, a syringe without a needle, all inside a small leather case.
And Amos got those items back later, so police never recovered them.
Never. That syringe would have been the definitive proof of how he administered the drug.
But even without it, the evidence they did have, the toxicology, the soiled sheets, the signs of trauma, it was enough to move forward. But the case really broke open when they started to see a pattern.
A deeply disturbing pattern. As news of the investigation spread, calls started pouring in. Relatives, doctors, police departments from all over the country.
And this is where the legal strategy had to get really sharp. Because Amos had this history, this trail of women dying under very suspicious circumstances while he was around.
And critically, while he benefited financially from their deaths.
So the deputy prosecutor, Nancy Westfeld, decided to use new rules that allowed these past incidents to be introduced in court.
Which was a pivotal move. She wanted to show his true intentions, this pattern of opportunistic serial murder to get insurance money.
Because none of the prior deaths had ever been solved.
Exactly. They were all suspicious, but nothing was ever proven. They needed to show these events weren't a coincidence. They were connected by motive and by method.
So let's look at that pattern. It starts with his first wife, Sandra Amos. She died in 1979, only 36 years old.
And his story was that she mixed a powerful sedative, Dalmane, with wine, collapsed, and hit her head.
But the autopsy didn't support that.
Not at all. It showed both Dalmane and alcohol, sure, but the drug levels weren't nearly high enough to incapacitate her. In fact, most of the drug was undigested.
Meaning she died very quickly after taking it.
Right, possibly before it could even fully take effect.
Right.
And she only had a tiny abrasion above her eye. Not nearly enough trauma to kill her. Cause of death was ruled undetermined.
But it's what happened immediately after her death that's so suspicious.
The key detail. A neighbor found Amos burning something in his fireplace. Amos claimed it was his wife's blood-stained clothes from her fall.
But she didn't have any bleeding wounds.
0. And there was no blood at the scene of the supposed fall. So what was he actually destroying? Evidence. He collected $350,000 in insurance money from that death.
The pattern just continues from there. 9 years later, his own mother, Mary Tolles.
In 1988, Amos moves in with her for a bit. She suddenly becomes disoriented, has to be hospitalized. Her doctor even suspected she was being drugged.
But she recovered.
She recovered, was released, and then died just weeks later while Amos was still living there. Because of her age, 76, no autopsy was performed. He inherited over $1 million.
And then, just 9 months after his mother's death, his second wife, Carolyn Amos, is also dead.
She had been his mistress while he was married to Sandra. Their marriage was already falling apart, mostly because he kept taking out these massive insurance policies on her life.
And his story for her death was just as bizarre.
Even more so. He said he found her dead in the bathroom. He brought her wine while she was blow-drying her hair, so he suggested electrocution.
But forensics showed she wasn't electrocuted.
No. The electrical cable had been cleanly cut. And again, cause of death, undetermined. And the scene was compromised. The wine glass he supposedly brought her was missing.
They found it later, washed clean in the dishwasher.
And, just like with Roberta years later, Carolyn's body position didn't match his story. Her pajamas were hiked up at the waist and feet, which strongly suggested the body had been moved after she died.
And he got another big payout.
$800,000 from her insurance policies.
So if you connect all of this, you have 4 women tied to Amos, 3 dead, 1 seriously ill, he's always there, or nearby.
And he always gains financially. And there's always a calculated effort to stage the scene or destroy evidence. Burning clothes, washing a wine glass, scrubbing a hotel room.
Detective Patrick Hanahan called him the kiss of death.
And the prosecution's theory was that he was an opportunistic, financially motivated serial killer, and Roberta was just his final victim. She was planning on leaving him, and he couldn't have that.
So the prosecution pieces it all together for the jury. Their reconstruction of Roberta's murder was it was damning.
Completely. They theorized he dissolved a huge amount of cocaine in water and somehow drugged her to get her incapacitated.
Then, once she was subdued, he administered that deadly, super-concentrated dose with a syringe.
Which explains both the insane internal concentration and that unusual vaginal residue.
And while she was convulsing, which we know is typical for a cocaine overdose, and explains that vegetative matter he tried to clean up, he finished the job.
He suffocated her with a pillow, causing those bite marks, the pressure marks, the bruise on her nose. Then he starts the frantic, obsessive cleanup.
The scrubbed room, the washed body, calling his friend to get rid of the syringe and the washcloth.
He thought he'd achieved the perfect crime, masked as an accidental overdose. He thought by cleaning everything it would be untraceable.
But the evidence he couldn't clean from the sheets, the physical trauma signature, the residual cocaine combined with the ghost trail of his past, that was enough.
Lowell Amos was convicted of murder, sentenced to life without parole. It just shows you how powerful textile and biological residue analysis can be, especially when you have clear behavioral patterns to back it up.
The Amos case really shows that physical force in trying to clean up a scene leaves a very clear footprint. But what about when a killer uses a chemical they think is perfect? Something tasteless, odorless, that acts so fast forensics are impossible.
Right, so now we switch to a deliberate mass poisoning attempt. This one relies heavily on some very advanced forensic chemistry to trace a tasteless killer, and then document analysis to expose a really complex deception.
This takes us to Tempe, Arizona. It's Monday, March 24th, 1986, at the Transamerica Title Insurance Company.
It's 8:30 in the morning. A 46-year-old employee, Julianne Williams, takes a drink of water from the office cooler. Within minutes, she is violently ill.
Cardiac arrest, falls into a coma, and she later died.
Sergeant Mike Palmer arrives at the scene, and he immediately notices this strong, unusual odor in the break room, almost like burnt almonds.
A classic, though sometimes faint, sign of cyanide.
Exactly. And crucially, they found this toxic substance in almost every communal container. Cups, the coffee pot, and of course the big water cooler.
So this wasn't a targeted murder. This was an attempt to kill or injure a lot of people.
A mass casualty event. And the reason police were called so quickly was because of one of her colleagues, a woman named Diane Harry. She was already terrified.
Why was she so scared?
Because she had gotten violently ill just days earlier. First after drinking scotch at her home, and then again after drinking tea. When she smelled the odor in the office, she recognized it as the exact same smell.
So at first, police think she must be the intended target.
That was the initial theory. And then her husband, Lewis Harry, shows up, acting like the worried spouse. He even gives police these threat letters.
Threat letters?
Yeah, claiming that he was being targeted by the jealous ex-boyfriend of some woman he had helped, suggesting that person was the killer, trying to get to him by poisoning his wife. It was a very complex web of deception right from the start.
So before they can unravel that, the forensic team has to identify the weapon.
Absolutely. Supervisor Jim Timmons at the Arizona Public Safety Crime Lab took charge. Based on the symptoms, the swift cardiac arrest, the sudden collapse, he narrowed the white powder down to a short list of potent, rapid killers.
Arsenic, strychnine, or cyanide.
The three most likely candidates, and this is where the forensic chemistry becomes this incredible masterclass in elimination and confirmation. They ran a series of 5 highly specific tests.
So, test number 1.
Test 1 involved UV light and a spectrophotometer. They dissolved the substance and measured how it behaved under UV light. Strychnine has these complex molecular rings that absorb UV light very strongly.
And cyanide.
Cyanide is simpler. It tends to reflect UV light. The substance showed a value, which at first suggested strychnine and ruled out cyanide, but they needed more confirmation.
So test 2 was for arsenic.
Right, you have to rule out the classic poison. They dissolve samples in acid, put a copper wire in the solution. If arsenic was there, it would plate onto the copper, turn it black. The test was negative, no arsenic.
Okay, so arsenic is out, which leaves cyanide as the prime suspect, even with those weird UV results.
So test 3 was a commercial cyanide confirmation. Timmons used a test strip. If cyanide is present, a specific chemical reaction causes a vivid red dye to form on the strip.
And it came up positive.
Unequivocally positive for cyanide.
But you need absolute court-ready proof, especially with something like this. So that's when they moved to the gold standard.
Test 4, gas chromatography mass spectrometry. GCMS.
The workhorse.
It absolutely is.
Okay.
It's how you get definitive identification. For cyanide, they sealed the powder in a test tube with acid. This creates lethal hydrogen cyanide gas.
And they feed that gas into the mass spectrometer.
Exactly. The machine bombards the gas molecules, they fragment into smaller pieces, and the unique pattern of those fragments is a definitive fingerprint. It confirmed the presence of hydrogen cyanide.
But they still needed to know the exact chemical salt.
Correct. Was it sodium cyanide or potassium cyanide? So for test 5, they used energy dispersive X-ray analysis, or EDX.
Which basically identifies the elements in the sample.
It bombards the sample with X-rays, and the resulting energy emissions are unique to each element. The EDX analysis showed a clear signature for potassium.
So both the office samples and the samples from Diane Harry's home
Were chemically identical. Potassium cyanide. The depth of that testing created an unshakable chemical chain of evidence.
And the scale of this was just shocking.
Horrifying. The police estimated the amount of poison in that water dispenser alone was enough to kill 150 people.
So with the poison identified and linked to both the office and the home, suspicion starts to shift. The breakthrough came from digital record.
Right. Police determined poisoning happened over the weekend. They checked the security card logs. Only one card was used during that entire time.
Diane Harry's card, used at 10:18 Saturday morning.
But Diane vehemently denied it. She claimed she was bedridden all weekend. The card should have been in her handbag.
Which shifted the entire focus to her husband, Louis.
If she didn't use it, who did? And Diane admitted Lewis could have gotten into her handbag. Then detectives found a witness who saw a black man driving a blue sports car, the exact kind Louis Harry drove right across from the office building around the time the card was used.
The evidence was piling up fast.
Fast enough to get a search warrant for Louis Harry's office at the community college where he worked. And what they found there just dismantled his entire defense.
What did they find?
The weapon itself. The chemical supplier label, some residual white powder, and a small plastic knife speckled with that powder. It was later confirmed to be potassium cyanide, so that's direct possession.
But the smoking gun was even more sophisticated.
Much more. Hidden in his notepad were the handwritten drafts of the very same threat letters he claimed had been sent to him.
And this is where forensic document examination becomes the final decisive link.
It really does. They brought in an examiner named Bill Flynn, and he made this profound point that handwriting is often more individualized than DNA. He'd never found two people with the exact same handwriting characteristics.
So he compares the drafts to known samples of Louis Harry's writing.
Meticulously.
Yeah.
He looked at pressure, slant, spacing, how letters were formed. And he confirmed definitively that Harry had written the drafts. He was the architect of the entire fake threat story.
But it was the envelopes that really cemented the connection.
An incredible piece of forensic luck. The envelopes that Harry gave to the police, the ones with the typed threat letters, were slightly damaged, an almost imperceptible manufacturing flaw.
Okay.
And in Harry's office trash, Flynn found a box of unused envelopes with the exact same identical manufacturing flaw. This was a rare defect, something that would usually shut down the entire assembly line until it was fixed.
So having those flawed, unused envelopes in his trash physically linked him to the ones he mailed to himself.
It was an incredibly strong link.
Yeah.
So the final step was tying him to the actual purchase of the poison.
They tracked down the chemical company.
Yep. The clerk there remembered selling potassium cyanide to an African-American man who signed the receipt with an alias, Charles Hawley.
So they get Lewis Harry to provide a handwriting sample.
They compelled him to write the name Charles Hawley, and Bill Flynn confirmed that Lewis Harry was the person who wrote the alias on that receipt. That linked him irrevocably to the purchase of the poison.
So the full story comes out. What was his motive?
He was having an affair. He was trying to frame the jealous ex-boyfriend of his secret lover. First, he tried to poison his wife at home.
And when that didn't work?
He stole her security card, snuck into her office, and dumped a massive amount of poison into the communal supplies, ensuring his wife and over 100 of her colleagues would be exposed.
He was convicted of first-degree murder for Julian Williams and 105 counts of attempted murder.
And he got a life sentence plus 105 years. And what's just profoundly chilling is that even after his conviction, his wife Diane still believed he was innocent.
For how long?
For a year, until her brother found a hidden box of cyanide in their attic. That final piece of irrefutable physical evidence.
We've seen how stains and powders can betray a killer. Our third case involves a killer who thought he'd found the perfect weapon because it was designed to just disappear.
Right, it would just evaporate, taking all the evidence with it. This takes us to Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1990, in the case of David Woodward.
It starts on the morning of March 28th when 6-year-old James Woodward finds his mother, Deborah, dead in the bathtub.
Now, Deborah and her estranged husband, David, were sharing the house in this tense timeshare arrangement for their 3 sons.
And the scene was immediately suspicious to the medical examiner.
Very. There were no bruises or abrasions that would suggest she'd slipped and drowned by accident. But the most alarming thing was the air in the bathroom. It was saturated with this strong, unusual, solvent-like odor.
The ME knew right away that a healthy adult doesn't just drown in a bathtub.
Exactly. Some external intervention had to be involved. And the crucial, subtle piece of evidence only appeared as Deborah's body dried out.
What did they find?
They found these distinct, unusual injuries inside her lips. This wasn't trauma from a fall. This pattern suggested something soft, like a rag soaked in a fluid, had been violently pressed over her mouth.
Forcing her lips and cheeks against her teeth.
Right, causing internal tearing and damage. This confirmed the death was violent, it was intentional, and it involved an external force holding something over her face.
So the focus immediately shifts to identifying that solvent odor.
The toxicology lab gets to work. Blood tests confirm a volatile substance, similar to acetone or nail polish remover, but it wasn't either of those.
So they put a blood sample in a gas chromatograph for a precise ID.
And the GC analysis definitively confirmed the substance was ether. High concentrations of it were found in every tissue in her body.
And ether is a historic anesthetic. It's a central nervous system depressant.
A highly volatile one. It causes dizziness, unconsciousness, and in high doses, death by respiratory arrest.
So the toxicologist, Ronald Becker, confirmed that the ether concentration was high enough to knock her out cold.
Rapidly. But it was the drowning that actually killed her. And that provided the clear, 2-part mechanism for the murder. Incapacitation by a chemical, followed by suffocation by water, which ruled out any possibility of accident.
So the search for a motive immediately points to the estranged husband, David Woodward.
Their relationship was incredibly volatile. Deborah had a restraining order against him. She lived in constant fear.
And she documented that fear.
Painfully. In her diary, which she'd wisely given to a friend, it detailed years of physical and emotional abuse. She called her life with him the absolute hell.
And David Woodward was an electronics expert, which he used to control her.
Completely. Her neighbor, a retired police sergeant she relied on for safety advice, confirmed Woodward had installed covert surveillance. A recorder in her car that turned on with the engine, taps on the house and phone lines. She had no privacy.
He was monitoring her every move.
And then, just days before the murder, the neighbor noticed this odd, subtle detail. He saw David Woodward meticulously taking down the motion detector lights that he himself had just recently installed around the house.
Which in hindsight is obvious premeditation.
Absolutely. He was removing the lights so he could approach the house in the dark, undetected, bypassing the very security systems he had put in place.
And this is where Woodward's plan completely failed. He was banking everything on the volatility of ether. He thought it would just evaporate.
And a coworker confirmed this. He told police that a year earlier, Woodward had actually bragged about how you could commit the perfect, untraceable murder with a volatile substance because it would just disappear.
But the forensic chemists looked deeper, not just at the ether, but at its impurities.
Exactly. The ether in Deborah's system wasn't pure medical-grade ether. It was contaminated industrial-grade ether, the kind you find in carburetor starter fluid.
And that difference is key.
It's everything. Medical-grade ether evaporates and leaves almost no residue. But industrial products, like starter fluid, they contain non-volatile additives, stabilizers, anti-corrosives, heavy hydrocarbons,
So when the volatile ether evaporates, those non-volatile additives are left behind.
and they form a dense, persistent fingerprint of that specific manufacturing process.
And since Woodward worked in an auto repair shop,
A place where carburetor starter fluid was readily available, that became the likely source of his weapon.
so detectives searched his garage and found several cans of starter fluid.
Right. They couldn't find the exact can he used. He likely got rid of it. But they took samples from several of the cans they did find. The lab then compared the impurity profiles of those cans to the impurity profile found in Deborah's blood.
And they found a match.
A very close match. They marked several cans with an asterisk, deeming them the possible source. And that accumulated evidence, the internal lip injuries, the industrial ether, the surveillance, removing the lights, and the physical link to the source of the chemical, it was enough to arrest him.
So the reconstruction for the jury was pretty clear-cut.
Very. Woodward used his key, entered the house after the kids were asleep, using the darkness from the removed lights. He soaked a rag in starter fluid, forcibly covered his wife's face, knocking her out and causing those internal injuries.
And once she was unconscious, he held her head underwater. He truly believed that because the substance was volatile, he had created a scientifically perfect, untraceable crime.
But the impurities, that specific chemical signature left behind by the industrial manufacturing process, proved him wrong. David Woodward was sentenced to life for murder and 9 more years for aggravated burglary.
And this is where the synthesis of these three cases, Amos, Harry, and Woodward, becomes so powerful. What they all show us is that the scientific signature of a crime is really indelible.
Even when the killer is sophisticated and obsessed with erasing every trace.
Right, you can scrub the floor, you can flush the evidence, you can rely on a chemical's volatility, but you can't fully erase the residue of a reaction or the unique marks of a physical fight.
And if you connect this to the broader principle of forensics, it's the arrogance of the killer that's always undermined by the meticulous nature of the forensic team.
Right. Amos thought he could hide the delivery method. Harry thought he could hide the source of the poison.
And Woodward thought he could rely on evaporation. They all tried to control every variable, but failed to account for investigators who know exactly where to look for that lasting signature.
Whether it's the manufacturing defect on an envelope, the impurity profile of industrial ether, or the pressure marks on a cotton pillowcase, the truth always leaves a verifiable trail.
And the lesson for us, and for you, is that science never just assumes the obvious. It chases the most minuscule, most overlooked trace.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means that even the finest powder or the clearest, most volatile liquid, it always leaves a residue. The body and the scene are the final, truthful witnesses.
And modern forensic chemistry has developed the tools to not only see that residue, but to tell its very specific story.
And here's a final provocative thought for you to consider. In a world where scientific methods are constantly getting more sensitive, more specific, how many historical cold cases are just sitting there waiting to be solved?
And not by finding brand new evidence, but by applying these hypersensitive modern techniques like high-resolution GCMS or advanced elemental analysis to old, saved biological samples.
Samples collected decades ago when the tools just weren't sharp enough to reveal the truth that was already there. That's something for you to mull over or explore on your own.